part 2 today. We're going to do is talk a little bit about how we did it, show a lot more images, of course, and we're going to talk a little about the equipment, the locations, and just wildlife photography in general. One of the things that is, wildlife can be found anywhere. We obviously think of our national parks in Africa and the Antarctic with penguins and the polar north with polar bears. But wildlife is everywhere. It's in your yard. Hell, it's in your house. There are insects to elephants. So what we can do is to kind of do the whole genre of what to shoot. And that's where we're going to go. Talk a little bit about wildlife and some of the things that I've done over 50 years. So wildlife photography means you have to be out there. And you're talking hours and hours, hundreds of hours, thousands of hours. In my 50 years, I don't know how many thousands of hours I've spent. And it's not just time in the field with the camera running. It's time in the field to get there, observation, waiting for something to happen that never happens, looking for animals that you can never find. It is the time to drive to the location. It's the day of prep and doing search. It's the day out there shooting. And then when you all get back and you've spent your hours driving back, it's all the time in editing and reviewing the material and doing the final selects and making a final piece, whether it's video or whether it's going to be a still image for print or for publication. So when you get back and you have all this material, you still have to edit it. Whether it's video for stock footage or whether it's going to be a broadcast application, whether you're working with a client for a natural history program, it has to be edited and delivered. And for still work, you can be doing is stock material there too, but you've got editorial and all of the print media. And it could be an iconic image, it could be just a supporting image that is part of the whole genre of wildlife photography. Not all images are the icon posters, cover shots. A lot of the material, especially in documentary films, is the supplementary work that helps tell the whole story. And one of the things that a lot of people don't think about when they're photographing wildlife is just how much supplement material is needed to help cover the story. It's not the iconic buffalo shot, it's the whole herd moving through the environment. And it's the weather they're in, it's the snow, the rain, the wind, and they may not be iconic shots, but it helps tell the story. So one of the things that we want to look at when you're out shooting is there's the iconic shot, of course, of that wonderful shot of the owl, but there's also the shot of the owl sleeping between hunts. It'd be great to grab them when they're hunting, but at the same time, most of the time they're just sitting in a tree or a post, watching and listening. Same thing with a fox. Most foxes sit around or they go trotting through a field. Rarely do you actually see them and catch them during their leap in the snow to catch that vole underneath the snow. So there's a whole genre of material that can be out there and shot that, again, it spends hours and hours to do it, but it's all part of the story. So where do we find wildlife? Well, obviously, here in the U.S., we have our national parks. I happen to be lucky. I live in Montana and I'm close by to several. I'm less than an hour away from Glacier Park. And I can do is to spend, 4 or 5 hours and go to Yellowstone, and another 3 hours after that, I can be in the Tetons. I head to the West Coast. I can hit, all the parks of Bernier and hit to California and Nevada. So the parks are around. Well, obviously, it's a very hard source, but it's like in the Yellowstone. It's the greater Yellowstone area. It's not just Yellowstone. It's the whole area. The Rocky Mountains is a wonderful area to be in. But if you get away from the national parks, there are state parks, there's national wildlife refuges, and closer to home, you've got your backyard, and zoos. I worked with a lot of zoos over the years to photograph their animals, both for documentaries on their material and for my own material. We've worked with natural history educators with some of their animals that they use for education, and we work a lot maybe once or twice a year, with animal rehab and rescue. So if a bird gets hit and has to have a part of a wing removed, but they're still, a great bird, they may not be photographable from one side, but you can photograph the other. And a lot of the rehab people are more than happy to have you come in and learn about the bird and photograph the bird for a donation or for them to use the material that you've shot to help them raise money to help with the education, the rehab, and the expenses of that whole project. Because it's taking care of birds and rehabbing them, and especially with rehabbing them enough to be reintroduced into the wild, is an expensive endeavor. So to look at this is some of the sources that you can find for wildlife. But biggest thing, you got to be out there. You got to spend the time and the hours to be out photographing and looking for it. And it's once you find the animal, you're going to spend a lot of time in observation to looking for the right shot. So we talk about wildlife equipment. Obviously, camera. I have used primarily 35 millimeter cameras, and for the cinema work, I primarily used RED digital cinema cameras. RED was great when they came out, 2007-ish, for being a raw format. And at that point, a very high resolution. Their first cameras came out at 4K, and now they're 8K. Now I primarily shoot on my Canon with 150 to 600 as my primary lens for wildlife. But I've done things 24 millimeter macro probe lenses. But the 200, the 70 to 200 Canon, and the 150 to 600 Canon, or the Sigma, which I use primarily, are the lenses that I usually use. But I started out with Nikon F2s, and then went to F4s. So on top of all of the equipment you need for the cameras and the lenses, you also should have camera support. Tripods, monopods. I've got 6 or 7 different tripods around that I've used, from gimbal arms to ball heads to cinema heads, monopods for just giving a little bit of support when you're a little beyond hand holding. But at the same time, if you're shooting a lot of bird material where they're flybys, that's a lot easier just to do is to do it by handheld. But there you got to be prepared for the ISOs, the shutter speeds, and the f-stops to be able to get the shot you want, especially in the low light conditions that a lot of what we happen to shoot. The last thing we do is talk about equipment in the field is blinds. I don't use a lot of blinds, but I do have a few. And I have camo, and a lot of our shooting is from the car. So the car becomes the blind, and that allows us to do is to sit there in the car and observe an animal for a while. And if they're close enough to the car and you have the right lens, you can get some wonderful behavior because they really don't see a person, they see the car. And you can always put a little netting over the window to shoot through, with a hole cut out for the lens, of course, so to help break up your silhouette. Because animals do react to the human silhouette. They're not particularly pleased to have us in their environment. We're spending a lot of time observing them. Couple of last notes on shooting wild. We go out looking for our elk and we don't find the elk, we find something else. We go, like a couple of weeks ago, I went out looking for short-eared owls and it turned out to be a lousy day for short-eared owls. I shot fog, landscapes in the fog. A few years ago, I went out and was shooting moose in a particular lake nearby, and I went about 4 days, and 2 of the days I found moose right off. And the fourth day, or third day I was out there shooting, went to shoot moose even earlier in the day, and never found a moose. Found a black bear, but I never found a moose. And I went back a couple of days later and found the moose again. So be prepared to not find what you're looking for, but be prepared to shoot. One last little note, this is, of course, we have to do is, subscribe. Leave a comment. I'd like to hear some comments on some of this stuff. And just so you know, the way I make my living now is selling prints and assignment work and some stock. We just did a little stock deal with Nature Conservancy. But yeah, so visit the links below on the About and the More, and visit the print stores. So yeah, hope to see you soon and next time.